Hi, welcome to another video. As we explore Impressionism yet again and how to bring your painting to life with my somewhat simple methods. This week's video is a companion really to the last couple videos I've put out that really are concerned about color application, and achieving life through a broken color method. Through this short tutorial, I hope to be able to demonstrate just the power and the energy and life really that you can attain in your work through careful and direct color application that was somewhat exemplary throughout the Impressionistic art movement, but also through post-Impressionism and Neo-Impressionism. They share some similarities but differ in methodology, approach to color theory, and the overall artistic goals really. If you are new to my channel, my name is Zorn and I've been a professional painter and a teacher of fine arts since 1999. So I've been at this for a while, but the whole YouTube thing is new to me and I'm having a whole lot of fun, I have to admit. Um, Before we get too deeply into my tricks and way to achieve crisp, direct, broken color paint application, I wanted to show you some examples of Neo-Impressionism throughout the last century and the century before that, um, and just to sort of share with you some key components of that art movement and how they were able to achieve such stark realism really in life through their careful brush control. The Neo-Impressionist art movement took place somewhere towards the end of the 19th century, 1885 to around 1935. And it was mostly driven by two young French artists who were good friends, Georges Seurat and Paul Signac. The hallmark of the Neo-Impressionism is the methodical application of tiny dots of strokes of pure color, which blend optically when viewed from a distance. It was heavily influenced really by scientific discoveries of the latter part of the 19th century. And you can see here on the split screen, I've now zoomed in onto the famous George Seurat painting out of the Chicago Institute of Fine Art, Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, painted in 1884. And this being his most famous and ambitious painting, this is quite a sizable work, measures more than 3 meters on one side by 2 meters on the other. You can see all the meticulous applications of color. This artist meticulously applied complementary colors to intensify vibrancy and luminosity. And as I pan through this sort of zoomed in version of this painting, you can see all the little direct applications of color, formal composition. The whole scene reads very methodically, sort of structured. It was very deliberate and analytical as opposed to, Impressionism, which was very much more spontaneous and whimsical. Each color here reads obviously differently from a distance as I zoom out here than it did up close. For my short demonstration here for this 9 by 9 inch landscape from our vacation painting, I'm also very much concerned about crispness and direct color application as they were back then. Each of the color cues, or color notes as I call them, are applied so as to not get mud on the painting with a brush or with my special tool, the squeegee brush, which I've discussed extensively in my previous videos. I'll get to a demo towards the end of this demonstration to sort of give you an idea as to how I apply it, the color onto virtually all of my works, and how not to get mud and retain that crispness and vibrancy throughout the painting process. On the split screen here, as I'm zooming in on it, we have the L'Andélie Côte d'Aval by Paul Signac. And as I pan out, you can also see that exact paint application process that we saw in the previous example, where they utilized optical mixing of colors through juxtaposition rather than blending pigments directly on the palette. Every color that was applied based on obviously color temperature and values. We've talked about that previously as well. And of course, we also covered that they kept warm colors and cool colors separately. Paint is methodically applied for these examples in uniform dots or short strokes, and precision and planning replace the freer, more gestural strokes of Impressionism or even post-Impressionism. I've chosen to include this third example on the split screen from a famous American impressionist, Childe Hassam, who wasn't really noted as a neo-impressionist, but some of his techniques certainly overlapped previous two examples. As you can see, as I'm panning through it and zooming in some of these images that read as a beach or a grass scene or a mountain, when you really look up close, it's just a juxtaposition of various colors that get applied again very methodically. His method is somewhat different, however, because it was experimental in technique, and that his application was thick in places, flattened in others. He emphasized form over naturalistic representation. And this last example is probably a best representation of Neo-Impressionism, and that is a screen by the Edward Munch. I am kidding, of course. I just wanted to see if you're paying attention. And as we continue painting our scene here, I've applied the background colors. I've now started working on the middle ground with the yellow grasses. And tandem to that, I've got a split screen of some of the paintings I've previously painted. My wife is showcasing them for us, tilting them just to show you some brush marks as to how they look from a distance and how they read from up close. These were painted, I would say, over the last year and a half, 2 years or so, on canvas, on mylar, and for some of them they were glued onto a board, which we'll get to in a moment. This smaller pieces are really a great way to sort of work out kinks for larger pieces. I have a tendency to do that. Even the vineyard shot that I'm painting right now for you for this demo will probably be something larger in the future. Having said that, this image that my wife's showcasing right now from our travels to Australia is a bigger piece. It's a 16 by 16. And as I sort of zoom in there, you can see the brush marks that I've sort of showcased with it and the broken color that was applied and the valleys of color. When you zoom into these things up close, they just read very abstract. That's part of the mystery, I guess, and what I like about my work the most. Sometimes it's very representational and that everything is, if you want to call it, rendered, but most times some abstraction is visible. Like in this piece right now that my wife's showing us, it's glued onto a gator board, which I recommend you do for all your thick oil painting paintings, especially if they're painted on like a canvas board or not a board, sorry, like a canvas that's not adhered to anything, or like mylar that we talked about previously. You can see how thick this paint can get, and it does have a tendency to potentially crack over time because of obviously buckling and bending. I've, as I said, applied it to a gator board, glued it down with acid-free glue, and I like these simplistic frames. This previous semi-abstract landscape was painted actually with a cold wax medium. I will hopefully do a few videos on it. I like using it quite a lot. Whereas this sunset piece was not. It's got actually I think it's a top coat from Gamblin, like a gloss top, which again, I have no rules. Sometimes I use gloss on top, sometimes I keep it matte. but I universally like to use these simple frames to showcase the work. I've recognized throughout my painting career and working with various students that the greatest hurdle for this type of painting and neo-impressionistic painting in general is how to apply color and keep it clean on the surface. I've chosen to do this side companion demonstration just so everyone is clear as to how I apply color and read it as that particular color on the substrate, and some of the tricks and I think somewhat simplistic ways that you can do that exact thing. Before we get to the color exercises there on the right, I wanted to have a look on the main painting and what I'll be doing in a moment there. There it goes. I'm scraping color off that I initially applied as sort of the like a baseline value that everything else is sort of painted subsequently from. I don't know if you recall, I used that little value gauge to determine what value the colors need to be, but as I was painting along and I got to this point, I thought it was just reading too dark for me. So I wanted to keep this in there, this part where I'm removing paint and adding new paint as just a lesson, really, for everybody painting. Um, this sort of thing happens often, much more often than you think. If there's some sort of thing that's off, value-wise, color-wise, temperature-wise, don't be afraid to remove it and reapply paint. Now to our painting demo on the right, the lesson that I wanted you to see. And you could have possibly seen some of this, throughout the painting process on the left. The way that I have a tendency to apply paint, you can see there I'm scraping paint off of that makeshift palette with a knife, applying it to a brush, and then the brush is applying onto the surface thick, juicy, and pastel strokes. Okay, it's the same brush that all three color values were applied on the right, the blue, red, and the yellow. This method where you scrape the color off your palette first, then apply it to your brush, and then apply it conversely onto your substrate, has a tendency to keep the color clean on the actual painting, even if the brush that you're using is the same brush. So no need to wash. Just give it a good wipe between strokes, reapply paint onto that same brush if that's the thickness that you want your stroke to sort of read, and apply it onto your surface. This way you won't have a bunch of brushes to wash after a painting session or having to wash it between strokes. Sometimes when you are in this zone, we call it intuitive art zone. There I am wiping that brush, as you can see. When you're in that zone, you just want to sort of apply color without any distractions. The second demonstration that I'm doing right now, I'm wiping the brush and I'm applying it. But in this case, I am loading directly from this palette and not from the knife. You will see here, and more so later when I zoom in, that the colors are not as vibrant. They are muddier. Now, you may want that as the finished look, so that's okay. But what I'm trying to showcase here is that when you apply it with that in-between step where the knife or this tool, which is my squeegee brush, mixes the color on your palette, um, and then applies it onto a brush and then directly onto the surface, the paint becomes much crispier and direct and reads closest to your palette as opposed to brush where it will always, virtually always have residual paint um, present. And as I said already, this is that squeegee tool that I've kind of showcased in the previous two videos. I'm mixing the paint with it, so this is the advantage of it over the combination of palette, knife, brush. I'm mixing paint with it, drawing with it, applying thick strokes with it. Color is very distinct, very direct, and reads exactly as that color that I want to have it read. Um, as I said previously, I have these in various sizes. I've gotten a bunch of comments from people asking me what they are, where I get them. I've tried to look for them online and through my suppliers. I can't seem to find them. I'm pretty certain that they are from a manufacturer called Princeton. And I kind of think that the lineup of these brushes were called Catalyst, but I'm not entirely sure. These things change. But as I said, I've had these for quite a long time. I use them for virtually every one of my works. As you can see there on the left on the main painting, I've applied paint onto the brush and from a palette knife, and I'm applying it onto it. I probably should have mentioned this already, but the purpose of this week's lesson is to lay down the foundation, really, of my methods. This particular video deals with color, and we've kind of touched upon edges somewhat in the previous videos. The other two foundations being the drawing and design, we've also talked about, but we'll do more in-depth videos on them. As we approach the end of this demonstration on the left and the painting lesson on the right, you can see the thick wet on wet impasto applications that I'm putting down with that squeegee brush. It really does lend um, a hand really when you're applying these distinct views, little notes of color. As you can see on the right there, I've zoomed in for our little lesson. You can see those distinct, both brush marks and squeegee marks that we talked about previously, and that the one that was applied with the brush that's a little bit more muddy on the right there. And as we go in for the final close-up, I know that the final piece doesn't read as much neo-impressionistic as it does maybe post-impressionistic, as it's not as methodical or structured, but it does share a lot of the characteristics of direct paint application, complementary colors that are applied to intensify vibrancy and luminosity. And that was really the purpose of this video, to showcase ways that you can apply color, whether more structured, more whimsical, and the tools that I find are invaluable really in that process. We will use this week's broken color method to apply it to a three-quarter portrait that I plan on doing for next week's lesson. That will be heavy on edge work. We will focus on edges as fundamental as they are. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next week's video.